Welcome back to AI for Founders. I'm Ryan Estes. Today's guest is Aaron Painter, the CEO of Nametag, a company on a mission to bring authenticity back to the internet by enabling secure, user-centric identity verification. Aaron's journey is anything but ordinary. His company tackles one of the biggest problems online, proving who we really are safely and privately. Aaron's worldview is shaped by his global travels, which taught him a powerful truth. Right and wrong are often depending on perspective, and at the core, people are good. Through his new venture, Nametag, he continues to explore the intersection of business, entrepreneurship, and human nature. If you've ever felt like the internet could use more trust, this conversation is for you. This episode is brought to you by kitcaster.com, where founders go to talk. If you're a startup founder or executive, getting your story out is critical. Kitcaster books high-growth entrepreneurs on top podcasts, helping you reach new audiences, build trust, and close more deals without lifting a finger. Podcast interviews are the easiest content you'll ever create and the most powerful. So if you're ready to amplify your voice and drive real business results, visit kitcaster.com to apply. Your audience is already listening. Kitcaster by Moburst.
Shining stars, computer light. Take the flight in the glow of neon bright.
And how's Austin today? Is it in the hundreds yet?
It's getting warm. I don't know. I'm not here that often, but it's certainly a warm day today.
Nice. Yeah, I miss it. I haven't been since South by last year, which is, just kind of a nice rites of passage for spring. But I'm always stunned at how hot it gets in Texas, how early.
That's what people say. I don't have too much historical context, but it feels like you're on vacation. The moment you're outside, it's just this absolute heat. It's like you're in some tropical island. At least that's how I like to think of it.
100%. Now, I'm really excited to talk to you, largely because doing research about you before this interview, I saw that you are a perfect candidate for the show, and I'll explain why. We seem to vacillate between two poles on this show. One is the absolute enthusiasm and excitement about the future that AI is delivering very, very quickly. And the other side is the absolute terror and horror that is included there. And what I love about your story is that you're deeply embedded in cybersecurity, but you also have this unbelievable optimism and what I would say like kind of a focus on human compassion. So before we get going, which side of the coin are you falling on today?
Well, thank you for the kind words. I would say generally I am an AI optimist. I'd say in our daily work, one of the areas we most encounter AI, aside from obviously where we use it in our product line, is around this rise of deepfakes and the idea of people using AI and Gen AI technologies to impersonate others. And that's become just incredibly relevant. I knew when we started a company 5 years ago that identity was an interesting and relevant area. Frankly, I didn't expect it to become as wildly interesting as it's become in the last couple of years, as just the foundation of human interactions in the virtual world and how fundamental that is.
And it's so timely as of like right today, because yesterday, Google Gemini released VEO 3, and then I don't know if you saw it, but Claude 4 came out today. So, I remember it seems like a million years ago, but I think it was 2 years ago where you had Will Smith eating the spaghetti. But what's coming out of Google right now with this VEO 3 is unbelievable. Have you seen some of that stuff?
I think one of the trends, I really, my career was a lot of time at Microsoft. And so I really grew up in the microprocessor and the desktop and the productivity era. And I would say that the initial hypothesis Bill Gates and Paul Allen in particular, and then later Steve had, was very much around the cost of computing going down, and therefore incredible things would be possible. And they saw that very early on. Bill talks a lot about that and why he dropped out of Harvard to go pursue the opportunity. And I think we're seeing the same thing with AI. There's this absolute certainty that the models are going to get better at an incredibly fast rate, which you're commenting on and seeing. And I think also that the cost of that compute power is also going to continue to go down. So the strength and the caliber of the scenarios are going to get better and better at an even lower price. And that creates an incredible set of opportunities for good actors and for companies and for people. It also creates an incredible opportunity for bad actors. And that line is the one that we toe a lot in our kind of day jobs.
And for context, let's talk about your company, GetNametag.com. And to your point, this is all about identity authenticity. Talk to us a little bit about the company.
Well, we started about 5 years ago with this premise that identity verification, I very personally, I had a bunch of friends at the start of the pandemic who had their identity stolen. And I said, all right, I'm going to be a good friend. I'm going to be a good son. We're going to jump on the phone. We're going to call these companies and figure out what's going on. And then when we did, before they could help us, they had to ask us these, maybe you've experienced, but security questions. What's your favorite color? What street did you live on in year X? And it turns out that someone had called before us and found the answers to those questions online or through leaked data or who knows what. They were able to answer the questions and then take over accounts.
Yeah.
And so it led to this kind of realization that how is it possible in the modern world that we really don't know who we're speaking with? Are they human, but let alone which human are they in any sort of virtual interaction with us on the phone, online, or some hybrid of the two. And so it led us to understand or think deeper about what technology exists today to really verify who a human is and who that person might be. And we found that the most of the industry had been in what's called, know your customer or KYC requirements, particularly in financial services. But let's say to open a new bank account, someone might ask you to scan an ID and take a photo of yourself. But yet, coincidentally, when you call a bank later on and you want to transact, they're not relying on that data anymore. They're back to asking you things like security questions or sending you an SMS message. So we said, why is identity verification not able to be used for these security-oriented use cases? And this was before the rise of deepfakes. But the digital manipulation, as we thought of it then, was someone literally using Photoshop, making a fake ID, saving his PDF, and then uploading that PDF into some, know your customer tool. And so it led us to try and find a solution. And what we ended up discovering was the ability to do the same end user experience, scan your ID and take a selfie, but do it exclusively on a mobile phone. And if you do it on a mobile phone, you get all these advanced security features of these modern mobile phones. Think the camera that powers Face ID, let alone all the cryptography and the advanced features and functions, and we say telemetry data in a technical sense, that lives and comes from a mobile phone. You could suddenly do these new things. You could verify someone's identity using a phone in a really high fidelity, high assurance way. And that was a huge breakthrough for us. We did a bunch of patents and things around it, but we didn't quite know the use cases. And then in the last few years, we've working with a lot of great companies have found some really high impact use cases, namely to protect people and their accounts. So if you can verify who someone is and then link it to make sure that their account, let's say, isn't taken over by an impersonator using, Gen AI or a deep fake, then you have something that's incredibly relevant for the moment.
Yeah, boy, and this is just the dawning era for your technology, right? I mean, because it's not going to be transactional. It'll be absolutely for everything, just to validate that it's coming from a real person. I believe that President Trump enacted some bill along these lines that was talking about, the need to at least demark when something's AI generated. It's fascinating. And there was another bill in Colorado that actually got struck down. Polis kind of begrudgingly signed it, but it didn't make it through the House, largely because it wasn't seem as tech sympathetic as they'd like it to be. But I mean, it's coming for sure. That and we're going to have to protect it because, I mean, there was a time when I was having dinner at my cousin's house, and they were also entertaining some neighbors. They're an elderly couple. And they were telling a story about friends of theirs that got a phone call. And it was like, oh, hey, grandma, it's Johnny. And they're like, Johnny? Who's Johnny? He's like, oh, don't be silly. It's your grandson, Johnny. Well, I'm in trouble. I need $1,000. So you know where this goes. Now, the issue that I found so disturbing is because they're preying on elderly people. And she knew she didn't have a grandson, Johnny, but she wasn't totally sure because she's a little bit insecure about her mental faculties. Well, that's just a con man, right? And isn't that the difference between a social engineering of how people actually hack into accounts more often than not, it's kind of a con, as opposed to the idea of the hacker in the 90s that has a ski mask on and is looking at the matrix code, So
you're exactly right.
Yeah,
you're exactly right. I think you said it in a very elegant way. That concept that we now use the term social engineering, it sounds very sophisticated, but really it is what we used to call someone being a con artist.
Yeah.
And we've just now given these superpowers to bad actors to be able to con their way using really sophisticated technology. But the vulnerability today in the online world is in authentication and login technologies and so forth. There's a lot to talk about there and better ways to implement than others. But the real focus is truly a human experience where you simply call a help desk and say, hey, I'm locked out of all that great security that you put around my account. And then you're back to sort of square one and back to theoretically two humans interacting and trying to assess if it's really the rightful account owner. And that is a fundamentally sort of human practice and human flaw in a way that we've now put around these digital processes.
Yeah. And I mean, it was one thing that digital natives could be worried about their nanas and papas getting, shystered by the Nigerian prince scam or something like that. And you're like, oh, no, you got to be careful. But now, I mean, the technology is such that it can get everybody. I mean, you have the voice cloning technology that's unbelievably good. The video that was coming out yesterday is basically cinematic. Now, that's, of course, if you're looking at it on a phone. If you blew it up, you could see like very clearly that it was a fake, but I probably couldn't tell if I didn't have my glasses on. So now, like, truly, this is kind of like needs to be a all hands on deck kind of conversation where it's like right now, like you're going to have to double think, especially in an emergency situation where maybe your judgment's a little compromised. So the need for this is incredible. So let's talk about direct. If I'm a customer, I'm going to GetNametag.com. What exactly is going to be my kind of like adaptation to the tool? Who are your favorite customers and kind of how would it work from a user standpoint?
Well, most of our customers today are large corporations in a variety of different industries. And so, in the tech space, you can think of, companies like HubSpot or software platforms like Autodesk or, the internet domain providers like Network Solutions. And in all those cases, the companies either use us to protect their customer accounts or often also their workforce accounts. And so the natural scenario you would have is, an employee or someone pretending to be an employee calling the IT help desk and asking, saying that they're locked out of their account and maybe they're on vacation, or you can imagine the creative stories that come up, and therefore they need their access reset. And that, so poor, hardworking help desk rep who went into business in theory to help people is now left to be this sort of identity interrogator. And so one of our first solutions was making that process easier. It was allowing the help desk reps to send a one-off verification link to the people who might call. And then the user could verify themselves. The help desk rep would have some confidence and assurance in who they're speaking with, and then could proceed with resetting. And so it made the social dynamic much easier because, again, the help desk rep can be there to help as opposed to have to quiz you and try and identify if you're the right person.
Yeah.
We quickly then learned that over half the support tickets in most companies were people locked out of their accounts. And so we created these integrations and partnerships with a lot of other great technology companies, like Okta and Cisco Duo and Microsoft and their Entra Stack and many, many others, where it became this idea of, hey, what if we could very quickly help a company set up and surround whatever enterprise applications or directories or identity platforms they had, but add this critical layer of secure identity verification to it. So it meant, in addition to having that help desk tool, an employee, let's say in a company, could go to a website and click a button that says, I'm locked out, verify themselves with Nametag, and then we reach into Okta or Duo or Entra or whatever it might be and allow the end user to perform the reset. So they don't actually have to call the help desk in the first place. And for us, that became really one of our first breakaway products because it's just a gap in the rest of the whole technology ecosystem. And yet it's a really, really relevant problem.
100%. So with enterprise type customers, is this a SaaS model basically where subscribers are paying on a seat basis?
Yeah, we actually price it like those customers buy MFA.
Yeah.
They buy MFA based on the number of employees they have, roughly. Call it users, employees, some different definitions there. We think of it as people, as humans. So however many humans in your organization, you sort of license that number. And then one of the really unique technology breakthroughs about doing this secure identity verification flow on a mobile device is that we can also make it reusable. So once a person goes through the flow once, we can re-verify them, all the future times, even faster, and we can do it with just a selfie. And so one of our early patents that was issued became, compare that selfie. Now, it's a three-dimensional spatial selfie captured in a secure way, et cetera. But it's a selfie compared to the earlier selfies back to the government-issued ID. So you get this really high fidelity assurance. You think Face ID on the iPhone is amazing, but actually they don't know whose face it is. It's just the face that you enrolled when you first set up the device.
Yeah.
And so if you're trying to say, no, it's really me, I'm the owner of this account, I'm the employee in this company, Face ID alone unfortunately is not enough. But the technology behind Face ID, we've learned that we can apply and re-verify that person back to definitive sources on things like a government issued ID or other employee information.
Amazing. So then, and then the verification that your tool does is actually through the phone. So it'd be like you're using the facial scanning software and things like that. You're kind of adopting some of the technology from the phone to then create the authentication in real time. Is that right?
Yeah, it's really a super simple user experience. You're on the phone and you go to your company's page and you tap the button. If you're on desktop, and you would scan a QR code that opens it up on mobile. And the thing that opens in both cases is something really novel but kind of beautiful. Apple calls it an app clip, and Android calls it an instant app. But it's basically a mini application. That's a full native application. It's registered with both the platforms, but you don't actually have to go to the App Store to get it as an end user. So this thing just pops up on your phone, and it feels like it was part of the phone, part of the OS. It was always there. But for us, it's a mini app delivered over the air on demand and has all these security features that a full app you would have downloaded from the App Store has. So it looks almost like a web browser window, but it's actually a full app. And that's one of the things that gives us this great security benefit of knowing the evidence we're about to collect. Let's say if you taking your selfie or other things, we know that it's coming from a definitive source that hasn't been tampered with.
Yeah.
And if you're going to deploy a deep fake, the main way you do it is you tamper with that evidence collection. You say, no, you think you're getting this photo from the camera on, let's say, a desktop, but actually you're getting it from my deepfake software.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult to do on a mobile phone.
Yeah. You know what I love about that too is if the user experience is beautiful, then you feel reinforced with your decision. Like, oh, I'm making a good security decision. The problem with MFA is that it's annoying. And it feels like, oh, you got to do 3 steps. It pops open a new portal and then it's texting you and you put in the thing. And it's just like, I'm trying to get to the thing. But if it's an elegant solution, then you're like, okay, I'm safe, and it builds trust, which is cool. I tell you what, while you're talking, I was thinking like the coolest thing that could happen in this conversation is right now, like your face on my screen would morph into a giraffe and be like, just kidding, I'm a deep fake. If you would have validated Aaron before we got on the call, you would have known.
Well, you're onto something really important. I mean, it's very relevant. It's that all these platforms that we have today that rely on we get to know each other, Zoom, Teams, the various video recording platforms. They all rely on largely this webcam on the computer.
Yeah.
And for better or worse, that webcam was never designed, literally at the hardware layer, it was never designed for security.
Yeah.
It was designed for convenience. And so it's not wired into the secure, the trusted module literally at the hardware layer, like your keyboard is, like the fingerprint reader might be on your device. Those things are actually secured. They're sort of cryptographically connected and physically wired. They are same thing when we use the mobile phone cameras the right way. But on a desktop, it's not.
Yeah.
And that's why we're having this total outbreak of people using deep fakes in video calls, in identity verification flows, and elsewhere. It's because the cameras were not designed to prevent against this type of attack. Right. And it's become incredibly widespread.
Totally. There was a great interview on Rick Rubin's podcast. It's called Tetragrammaton. And he interviewed, who was it? It was, I think, George Orwell. And George Orwell has been dead probably 80 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't know George was still around for an interview, but love it.
But it was extraordinary. It was like the voice was perfect. Rick would ask really tough questions, and the response was witty and dry and a very British sense of humor and immaculate. And you could tell Rick was kind of having a fun time kind of poking at the software, but also just wow, this is actually really insightful. I mean, the deepfake, the era of the deepfake is here right now. And also we have the era of the actual fake. I don't know if you heard this story, but it was an enterprise company that was hiring, and the hiring agent went through 2 or 3 rounds of reviews with this guy, George, let's say. George aces it. And then, 6 weeks later, They're like, oh, hey, George is in the office. He wants to meet you. And he introduces himself to George. He's like, that's not the guy I interviewed. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's funny. None of they were all tuned out on the interview. They're like, yeah, of course, it's George. But no, this guy had like hired someone to do the interview process for him. And then he just showed up and took the job.
It's wildly more common than you think, I have to say. And I mentioned our breakthrough product was solving this recovery, employee lockouts of MFA. But what really the last several months, particularly since, fourth quarter last year, October, November, we had a bunch of our customers that started coming to us and saying, hey, I actually have another issue. I might have hired a North Korean. And first we kind of thought, oh, okay, it must just not be North Koreans, and this is sort of a euphemism for something. But it is true. The wild amount of targeted attacks from North Koreans using agents and others in other countries, including the U.S. They are applying for jobs. They are getting jobs. They are passing light HR background checks, which typically involve a social security number. So that can pass, but you don't actually know that that's the same person who's applying for the job. Then they're getting hired because, IT has this role of, especially if it's a remote worker, dear new hire at your Gmail account, click here to set up your password and configure your MFA. And that entry point is incredibly risky if you're not very certain that the person you hired and the one getting that email is the person you intend to invite into your corporate network.
Totally.
And so that was sort of the basis of a new solution we launched in January that's become wildly popular. And it's just one step in the life cycle. You might want to verify your employee before you onboard them or provision them. You might want to verify when you see suspicious behavior. You might want to re-verify when they call the help desk or they're locked out.
Yeah.
And that's kind of this insight we've had, that it's part of it is the unique way of being able to do the identity verification. But the other way is the ability to re-verify someone and connect them or get them back into those accounts.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's an incredible gap in today's normal enterprise stack.
It's incredible. I mean, all of us can probably relate. You get once a week, you get an invoice just sent to your inbox. And it's like, yeah, I'm definitely not clicking on that. The one that got me was probably about a year ago, where I had just done a big order through FedEx. And it just happened to be, I got a text message that was like, oh, hey, you're short on your shipping cost. And I was just absent-minded enough to be like, dang it, all right, and went in and then like put in my credit card information. And then I looked at the URL and I was like, oh my God, immediately called the bank, canceled the card. But it's like,
right.
The tools are facilitating a level of scale to put this kind of pressure on all of us that when your defenses are down for 1 second, it's going to get you. Now, this kind of work, I could imagine, Aaron, could lead some to maybe paranoia and despair, let's say, but that's not you. You're the guy who wrote a book I'd love to ask you about called LOYAL, which is an acronym for Listen or You Always Lose. So how do you balance being terrified every day of the potential risks and, the security you're providing, which is great, but also like to stay optimistic about human nature in general?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And as the book was something really exciting, a few years ago, this focus that really the insight that, when employees feel like their voices are heard and they're listened to, they carry that to how they engage with their customers. And you get sort of a virtuous cycle of both parties feeling more connected and, fundamentally then loyal or, committed to an organization or a team or a cause. And so, yes, we live in this world of what's next and defining bad actors and watching bad actors and seeing what they're going to do and thinking of what they're going to do next. But at the same time, we find a lot of comfort and kind of joy, I think, as a team, much more than just me, around the good that we're having, and the crimes that we're stopping in a way. It feels like a bit like you're a crime fighter.
Yeah.
We had one customer actually. They were very early. They had just sort of signed with us, and the rollout's quite quick, but they like day to day, and they hadn't even turned on the system yet. And they said, we have this one case. Everyone thinks that we've hired someone fake. And so we want to use you, Nametag. We want to use you the first time. We're gonna try this and see how it goes. And we're pretty confident this is fake. So it's kind of just a test. And actually, the system Nametag identified that it was a legitimate person. And so the whole company was like, oh, well, let's double click on all the stuff that we had, and what led us to this conclusion that it was a fake person. And they found out that actually it was a real person, and that their own biases had triggered a whole bunch of things, and there were some interesting signals, and the person had a past that for good reason they were kind of running from in a way, but they were a legitimate person and everything else was honest and true. And And so in a way, we sort of saved this person's job. That's what the company pitched it back to us. They were like, hey, good for you folks. Like, we wouldn't have hired this person. And now thanks to you, they have a job and they're doing great. And those are sort of the fun things where you say, hey, can we positively impact people's lives? And the volume of frauds that we see and that we prevent on a daily basis, you say, well, that could have been really bad. I'm really glad we're able to intervene there. And so that's kind of the fun stuff that really motivates you to stay on top of it and to live in the dark side in order to figure out how to find the light.
It's an amazing way to put it. Do you believe that humans are basically good and live and learn to do wrong, or basically wrong and need to be taught to do right?
I think some of that question, my experience was a lot living in different parts of the world. I traveled to 100 countries by the time I was 30. I lived and worked in many, many countries and geographies around the world. And I think one of the big things that stood out to me has been there are different elements of society that shape someone's answer to that question. Some of it is religion, some of it is cultural, but different people in different parts of the world have very different views on what is right and wrong. And it's one thing to live in our sort of this U.S. ecosystem, and we have a plethora of views and religious views and other things, but there's some fundamental things that ground the society, and call it a roughly Judeo-Christian principle system, certain laws. There are things that we sort of define what our society thinks are right and wrong. And it turns out I was in China for 5.5 years, and culturally in China, for example, organized religion is not as strong, but the rule of the state and cultural practices are very strong. But what one might think in the US is wrong, one in China might totally not think is wrong. And there's various arguments to say who is right on that, but people do grow up with very different perceptions of that. And I think one of my big learnings has been trying to be understanding of that and to put on the perspective of the person that's coming through it, and what might have led to their choices. And then I get to choose, obviously, what kind of choices I want to make. But it's at least made me less cynical or disappointed in everyone, because I realize people often have their own value system that led to a decision.
Yeah. So you believe then, to paraphrase, that humans are basically good?
I think we have to hope that humans are inherently good. And yes, I do believe that as well. But I think sometimes the choices that they make, we might be quick to say are good or bad. And in reality, there might be a lot of other factors at work that shape someone's own perception. Just because someone does something that we think is bad, they might not have thought of it as bad at the time they were doing it.
Yeah.
And possibly for good reason.
Yeah, right and wrong is a weird polarity that isn't actually real. Maybe in the extreme of the mean, and as a deeply devout person and an American, maybe Americans can relate to this, is that I believe in the NFL, and NFL football being my governing principle. Some people might not understand that on the other side of the world. You know what I mean?
I'm sure that's spot on. Yes. And they might say the same thing about cricket or a whole bunch of other things. But you're absolutely right.
Nice. I want to take a little bit of a different twist on AI. You have a software product, and as you were talking about the exponential nature of AI is like potentially going to run the cost of electricity probably to zero at some point. It's also going to run the cost of software to zero, as basically knockoffs can get vibe coded on while someone's sitting in a hammock somewhere. So when you're thinking about a software business, how are you looking to build moats? You talked about having patents, which of course is great for protection inside the States. I don't know if China respects our intellectual property, but how do you protect a software company in 2025?
Well, I think there's enormous value in the additional views that AI can give us, particularly in coding. I mean, GitHub Copilot is not talked about enough, because it is fundamentally one of the most widespread adoptive uses of that sort of scenario. The ability for software to check your code, to help check for errors, to help automate testing. I mean, there are incredible things that, for example, GitHub Copilot just now does sort of standard. And there are a lot of companies that probably rightly feel like it's going to make their engineers more efficient. There are some companies that have come out publicly more, particularly in the last few months, and said, we're going to hire less engineers as a result of that. But equally so, there are companies in other industries that have said, we're going to hire less, photographers, we're going to hire less, early career stage lawyers, or you name the profession. And I think in some ways, the bar of what now is minimum and what we expect for a human, it is getting harder. And so much like whenever there's a new technology change that comes along, and that's been our almost our entire lives, with not always machine-based technology, but technological innovations have driven innovation and big cycles for almost all of human growth. It's about learning and understanding and embracing and thinking about, okay, how can I use this for the better? How can I add value on top of this? And one of the things I find most exciting now is watching what you've done on past podcasts, asking people, how are they using AI? What tools are they finding useful? How is it making their life or their job better? And those are very fun conversations. And none of those are about the tool replacing the job. It's about the tool often replacing parts of a job or help making the job better or helping you do better work or higher value work. That's the stuff that I get really excited about. AI as a companion or, the co-pilot in that terminology.
Yeah, it is scary, and probably for good reason, but it reminds me when I was a kid, across the alley lived Mr. Bridgewater. And what I remember about Mr. Bridgewater is he had this really cool handmade greenhouse, but it was made out of planes of glass. And in retrospect, I'm like, dude, that is the most dangerous room I could have ever been in. And I was in there all the time. Anyway, Mr. Bridgewater was an old man, and he used to train horses in Larimer Square, downtown Denver, when he was my age, when he was a boy, and it's like, oh, Mr. Bridgewater made it. They didn't need to train horses anymore, but he figured it out. I think we all will too. One thing I wanted to ask you, I was reading about you, and it said you've lived outside of the States, assuming that's your home, for 20 plus years. How do you create home, and how is home important to you?
I guess I'm much more of home as a concept, and are there people that I love and care about in communities I want to be in, and the flip side of moving around a lot is that people you care about tend to be all over, and so it becomes this cycle of, well, I've got to go travel to see the people I care about, and so you get into this cycle of constantly moving around to see people you care about and relationships you've made in different parts of the world. I love it. I'm naturally a very curious person, and I feel like travel in general gives me exposure to people and cultures and ways of doing business that I'm constantly learning about. And as much as the world feels like parts of it have become a little more flat with technology and ideas and things are shared much quicker, it's still incredibly special, I think, to be in different communities and cultures and be able to just learn from how things are done there and then take those learnings and to you can share them.
Yeah.
So home to me is often that experience, and in travel and immersing myself is part of it.
It's amazing. What's something you wish existed but doesn't, if we're talking about AI, software, or tools in general?
Well, I think this challenge that we're very focused on is a very real one. Like I think trust is more in demand than ever, and I think we have less supply than ever. Trust in government, trust in companies, trust in each other, trust every survey you look at in any way. Just we're in a pretty sad state of affairs. Things are getting worse, not better. And yet so much of progress in the world, and particularly the relationship between two people, and people often are the ones that make progress, it relies on trust. And that really worries me. And so I think I wish that there were more tools and ways to help build that trust, and particularly in a remote context. I think that the beauty is that the pandemic helped us accelerate of being able to do things remotely and get to know people and build relationships and stay in touch, and all that's incredible to be able to do remotely. But if we can't trust the interactions we're having, if we can't trust the people that we're talking to, then that's potentially really scary to me and really kind of sad, because I think it will slow down the progress of just human advancement. And so finding ways to build more trust in those virtual contexts, I think is it's a solution set. It's a category that I wish more people were spending time on.
Yeah. What's kind of be satisfying too is that the way you're kind of separating humans through identity and trust and authenticity is basically, these are the people that don't mean any harm at all, and then here are potential bad actors. And I think that's a great way to think about identity. You're talking about COVID. We just came through a big phase where identity was really put in the forefront, a different kind of identity about kind of celebrating each other's differences, but also kind of creating structure and hierarchies between identities that people were just born with, and in a lot of instances in this country that kind of pitted people against each other, so they're arguing about some pretty pedantic stuff, in my opinion, as opposed to like the larger conversation, which is like, well, all you guys are grouped together as an identity of people that don't mean harm and want the best for the people that they love, So I think that's going to be a more important identification of identity is like, hey, these are good people, And I don't want to say that bad actors are necessarily bad people because they all have their situations and they have their own accountability. But it's pretty cool. I think we're all grateful for the kind of work you're doing. And now talking about AI tools, what are your favorite tools right now?
Well, I think like you and I've enjoyed the conversations on some of your past podcasts. I think there are a lot of fun new things out there, and a little bit it comes back to what you're trying to solve for and what your needs are. I'll say there's a practical thing that I now use very frequently. I love. There's a new AI voice model called Whisper, and there's a product called Whisper Flow that I've kind of become obsessed with. And it's sort of like Siri if you talk to your phone and you ever dictated a text message, except it's a desktop equivalent of it, and it works much better. It's wild. Siri feels kind of dumb compared to using an AI voice model. And so I have the ability to sort of dictate to my computer when I'm replying to an email or I'm writing a Slack message or whatever it might be. And it's really kind of fun, and it's just increased my productivity on some of those things. You get an email and you kind of know what you want to say back. Okay, you're going to type it. When am I going to get to this? And the ability to just very quickly or at your own speed, sometimes even in a different language, I've seen friends do, reply to that email and then have a response there. It's just, it's amazing. I one of my favorite kind of go-to daily tools at the moment.
Cool. Whisper Flow. I've heard so much about it. I need to get it. Speaking of Siri, Johnny Ive just signed a $6 billion deal with Sam Altman to develop hardware. Why is Apple blowing it so hard right now?
Look, Apple under Tim Cook has done some amazing things. I grew up in this era of both Bill Gates and then Steve Ballmer and then a little bit of Satya at Microsoft, and they were each very different eras. And Steve doesn't get a lot of credit, but Steve really grew the business, the revenue, and everything about the stock price over a really concerted period of time. Yeah. And Satya brought a lot of other wonderful things to the culture and certainly rebooted the stock price. Tim Cook at Apple, he's been. I was at the Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholders meeting. I try and go many years, and I was there recently. And Tim Cook is there. He attends. He's on the floor. And Warren opened with a very, very complimentary set of remarks for Tim Cook, because what Tim has done under his tenure at Apple has actually been phenomenal in so many ways. But I agree. I think in this AI space and just the end user applications of AI, we're not feeling the excitement maybe out of what you get out of Apple Intelligence today. I would say it's actually not that different than Alexa, right? How obsessed were we all with Alexa in our homes and or Siri in our homes for the folks that had that, and compared to it now, Alexa just feels like a really uneducated, it's just not fair. You pit ChatGPT voice against Alexa, and it's you just kind of roll your eyes. It's sort of sad.
I know. I'm a fan of Tim Cook too, and believe it or not, I'm a fan of Apple Vision Pro. But it's like, how do you let Ive get away? How do you let Sam sign that deal? I don't know. Couple more questions before we wrap up here, Aaron. This has been so cool. If you're entering college today with the intention of finding gainful employment, what would you study?
That's a really hard question. I've had a lot of people ask that, and I've watched a lot of really people be asked that. And I was just doing some work on college campuses recently, and that is not a straightforward answer, unfortunately. I think the natural thing is to think about human experiences and things that might be uniquely human, but AI is contributing to a lot of that. I still love, and fundamentally, I love business. And so what's so much fun about my job is the ability to understand what technology is doing and being able to help businesses connect those two things. And I find enormous joy in that. And I might not know that person's business as well as they do, but I certainly understand what our forms of technology can do to help them. And it's a lot of what I got to do at Microsoft. And it was so fun because together you can come up with something new if you each have those areas of expertise.
Yeah.
And so I think developing areas of natural expertise in school, and by the way, outside of school and in other life experiences and maybe other work experiences, I think better prepares you for what's promises to be a world of incredible change and uncertainty in someone's adult life.
It's a great answer. For people that love business, I mean, has there ever been like a more fun time to live? It's so exciting. It's great.
I mean, I'm a geek on this stuff and historian on this stuff. So business throughout the eras has been like wildly fun. I think there are a lot of really interesting moments. But yeah, whenever you have an inflection point of new technological innovation, naturally it becomes a really exciting time of opportunity. And that's why, to your earlier point, I am very much an AI optimist. Not only on the scenarios of bringing back, the dead and historical figures or loved ones using deep fakes, but just because I think we are about to unleash an enormous era of human potential that's powered by a lot of this AI technology.
Nice. Yeah, I think the entrepreneurial spirit runs through bloodlines. So I would love to think of like myself now, like figuring out which direction I want to go with these tools and how I want to express myself through entrepreneurship and creating things is similar to my great grandfather sitting there eating a ham sandwich, being like, "Do I be a prospector and look for gold, or do I go trap beaver pelts?" Like he had the same big crossroad. Which one am I going to do? Maybe it's a little different. Amazing. Okay.
Yeah, we're entering an exciting period. There's no doubt about that.
No doubt about it. Where can people connect with you personally?
I'm most active on LinkedIn. I think you mentioned, and but I love messages. I love posts. We try and talk about things on a pretty regular basis, and I try and write about and share the things I'm learning and what we're seeing in the industry. I really believe this cybersecurity area in particular is something that needs a village. It needs a community of people sharing what they're learning and what's working and what they're trying. It's really the only way to stay ahead of kind of the bad actors out there. And so LinkedIn is a lot of the platform where we share that stuff and where I love the discussion.
Fantastic. And I will be sure to link your LinkedIn in the show notes so people can connect with you there. Aaron, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you having me, Ryan.
So let's talk about podcasts for a second. You're listening to one, which is awesome, by the way. Thank you so much. But have you ever thought about being a guest on a podcast? Like seriously, imagine sharing your story and your expertise and your business all on shows where your ideal customers are already listening. Kitcaster connects founders and entrepreneurs, professionals, with podcasts that actually make sense for their brand. No pitching, no guessing, you just have great conversations on great shows. And the best part, Kitcaster handles everything. You just show up and bring your A game, Kitcaster does the rest. This is hands down one of the easiest ways to grow your personal brand and just create a wellspring of content for short video, for blog posts, for speaking engagements, for whatever. So if you've been thinking, yeah, I really need to step up my content game, go to kitcaster.com and apply today. Now back to the show.